Hello and welcome. My name is Christy Evanko. I'm a board certified and licensed behavior analyst, but I'm also a parent of a 10-year-old son with autism spectrum disorder. As both parent and provider, I'm dedicated to doing all I can do to improve services for persons with autism as well as disseminate the profession of behavior analysis. I'm here today to speak to you about some of the recent laws regarding autism and applied behavior analysis. This presentation is intended for parents and caregivers of persons with autism, although really anybody is welcome to view it. First, I need to start by saying that I am not a lawyer and I have never studied the law. I'm a behavior analyst and I've researched and supported many of the laws that I'm going to talk about today, but this presentation does not constitute legal advice. So if you have any specific questions, you should consult a lawyer. Today, I'm going to talk about the laws related to autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, sometimes call it that, in the Commonwealth. And then I'm going to take a brief interlude to talk about the relation between ABA, and that's applied behavior analysis, and autism. And that's going to lead me to the laws related to ABA in the Commonwealth. And then I'm going to briefly touch on how you can change the law, and I'm going to end with some resources. So there are several laws in Virginia that relate to autism, and this list is not completely comprehensive, but it does touch on the ones that are most germane, and each year brings new legislation. The first law that I want to talk about was enacted in 2011, and it's the Autism Advisory Council that was created to make recommendations to the legislature. And in 2014, most recently, a new bill was created that extended the council through July 1st of 2016. Now, this council has met and they viewed lots of presentations regarding the issues related to autism. They made 3 recommendations for 2014. And the first was for the General Assembly to provide sufficient long-term funding to eliminate the waiting lists and vocational rehab and eliminate the order of selection. Also for the GA to reduce the waiting lists for the ID and the DD waivers with additional funding. And for the GA to require the Board of Medicine to provide and distribute information about autism. Now that last suggestion was taken, and actually there was another law that was passed this year for requiring the Board of Medicine to put information about autism on its website. The Board of Medicine is now required to make information about the identification, diagnosis, and treatment of autism, as well as the role of providers in identifying, diagnosing, and treating autism, available to those who are licensed through the Board of Medicine. This information is not yet available, but it's expected to be up there in July of 2015. Another law that was passed in 2013 actually directed the Joint Commission on Healthcare to study the service needs of persons with autism who are transitioning out of high school. If you are interested, you can find the full report at the website that is listed on this slide. That's at jchcvirginia.gov. But there were 8 policy options that were presented, and the Joint Committee members actually voted not to take any action on those. One law that really did have a great effect was HB 325, that was the bill number, and this law requires paraprofessionals who work with children with autism in the schools to receive training in student behavioral management. Competencies were approved by the Board of Ed in January of 2013. Now, local school boards are either required to provide training or they can use the training developed by VCU-ACE, which is free of charge. The VCU-ACE website has more specific information and the address is listed here. And there's many thanks goes to John Maloney, who was instrumental in getting this bill passed. Another recent law requires the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, we call that DBHDS, and the Department of Rehabilitative Services, we call that DRS, to establish goals to help persons with autism obtain and sustain employment. Unfortunately, even though it was well-intentioned, it is difficult for these organizations to fulfill the request without additional funding. There were several recommendations, including that the DBHDS seek emergency regulatory authority to include intensive individual support services as a new licensed provider category. And this is now happening because licensed behavior analysts can provide consultative services through the ID and DD waivers, as well as through the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, or DARS. Another recommendation was to expand the development of rehabilitative services to respond to the increasing demand for autism services, and DRS has been doing this yearly. Another recommendation that was not able to come to light was to implement a 5-day regional autism support training, work training for 750 participants, and the funding was not provided for that recommendation. But in October of 2012, DBHDS released their strategic plan for employment first. Now in 2014, a law was passed that permits applicants to request that autism or intellectual disability be put on their license. And additionally, the law permits applicants to request the designation of autism or an intellectual disability, as well as hearing and or speech impairment and insulin-dependent diabetes on a state-issued ID card. Hearing and speech and the insulin-dependent diabetes is already a provision on licenses. But in order to request these and request having this put on your license, the applicant has to have a signed statement by a licensed physician. So before I talk about the laws that specifically apply to ABA, I really wanted to briefly discuss the relationship between autism and ABA. So when you say applied behavior analysis, or ABA, many people have preconceived notions of what that means. And often people will think of one or a few techniques that they have heard of or seen used under the guidance, under the heading of ABA, and such as discrete trial training, or that's a therapist working one-on-one with a child teaching skills in a systematic manner. Or differential reinforcement, which is reinforcing behavior that you want to see but extinguishing behavior you don't want to see, or even the use of visual schedules or aids. What ABA really is a science based on the principles of behavior. The principles were described by B.F. Skinner in the 1960s, and today ABA has evolved to encompass evidence-based techniques, including shaping, reinforcement, extinction, environmental changes, and more that are established on the principles of behavior. Often when you think of behavior, you might think of maladaptive or negative behaviors that you don't want to see, like aggression or screaming, temper tantrums, or even eating inedible items. But behavior analysis frequently focuses on reinforcement of pro-social or positive behaviors that you do want to see, like speaking, interacting with peers, focusing on academic tasks, and following instructions. ABA is marked by extensive data collection that is ABA is marked by extensive data collection to ensure that interventions are effective in changing the behavior in a significant manner. When interventions are shown by the data to be ineffective, then they should be changed, or they are changed. ABA is not something that is solely done or performed in the classroom or controlled settings, but rather the use of the principles that are extended everywhere, including the home or the community, from helping your child get dressed in the morning to waiting in line at McDonald's or getting his hair cut. And finally, in Virginia, the law stipulates that applied behavior analysis must be provided or supervised by a licensed behavior analyst. The definition of ABA differs slightly depending on whom you asked. The Behavior Analysis Certification Board, or the BACB, the Virginia General Assembly, the Board of Medicine, Autism Speaks, Random Behavior Analysts, and all of these organizations have their own definitions. But my favorite way to explain ABA is through its 7 dimensions. These dimensions were defined in 1968 by Bear, Wolf, and Risley in their article that was entitled Some Current Dimensions of Applied Behavior Analysis. And in a nutshell, they're applied, behavioral, analytic, technological, conceptual systems, effective, and generality. True behavior analysis is grounded in all 7 of those dimensions. In brief, applied behavior analysis is applied in that it is used to solve problems of social importance or problems that are important to people's daily lives. It is behavioral in that it focuses on measurable behavior or behavior that can be seen and evaluated. It is analytic in that it requires concrete data to show that interventions indeed had an effect on behavior. ABA is technological. That means thoroughly described so that many others can replicate the interventions. And it is conceptually systematic because it arises from specific scientific theories. It's effective in that it produces solid, socially important outcomes. And finally, it's able to be generalized so that the effects are not just seen in the environment in which they are taught. ABA is used in a variety of areas, from animal training to managing employees in the workplace, from marketing to helping people with disabilities. ABA, or behavioral treatment, is the only treatment that has been shown through research to be effective for children with autism. The most famous extension of ABA to autism began in 1987 with Ivar Lovaas's landmark study, where he used it as a treatment of young children diagnosed with autism. In that study, some children received the treatment while others did not. In the group of those who received the treatment, almost half were said to be indistinguishable from their typically developing peers by the age of 7. In the group that did not receive ABA therapy, only 2% achieved what they call normal intellectual and educational functioning. But since then, there's been extensive research on ABA and its applications to persons with autism spectrum disorder. In 2000, the Surgeon General noted the success of ABA in the treatment of children with autism. In 2001, the National Research Council noted 40 years of research testifying of the effectiveness and noted that ABA is the only treatment that has been empirically demonstrated to be effective for children with ASD. So since 1985, there have been more than 500 articles published regarding ABA and autism. Now, most recently, the National Standards Project was updated, and that actually now includes persons over the age of 22, and the report shows the efficacy of interventions that are rooted in ABA. I want to talk a little bit about who is a behavior analysis professional. There are actually currently 3 levels, or 4 really, of behavior analysts, because the 4th being the registered behavioral technician. So there's a doctoral level, or a BCBAD as they're called. There's a master's level, or BCBA, and both of those are referred to as licensed behavior analysts when they receive their license. The 3rd level is a bachelor's level, or a BCABA, and when licensed, these professionals are referred to as licensed assistant behavior analysts, or LABAs. BCABAs are required to receive supervision from BCBAs on a regular basis in order to practice. Now, aside from the type and amount of schooling one has received, there are also differences in the number of experienced hours needed to certify and in the examination that is taken based on the level. But there's not much of a difference in terms of what they do. Now, additionally, in June of 2012, the BACB, or the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, announced the development of a new credentialing program for registered behavioral technicians, or what we call RBTs. Now, these professionals are the frontline staff who implement behavior plans. This is a very new certification, but there are already several RBTs throughout Virginia. As I said before, behavior analysts are certified by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or the BACB. And this is a national certification organization that was established in 1998. Now, there are many requirements, and you can see the long list of them, for those wishing to be certified, including having a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree in a related area, postgraduate education on top of that in behavior analysis through an accredited school, supervised experience between actually 500 is the lowest and 1,500 hours, depending on the certification level and the intensity of the program, the passage of a board examination, ongoing certification requirements for BCABAs, and continuing education requirements. Now, the BACB reviews and raises standards for its certification programs on an ongoing basis. For instance, there were recent guideline changes in supervision, degree eligibility requirements, including university accreditation, BCBAD eligibility requirements, and continuing education requirements. The BACB also publishes a task list of items which every behavior analyst should be familiar with before taking the exam. The current edition is the 4th edition task list, implemented in 2015. Additionally, the organization provides professional, disciplinary, and ethical standards with which all certificants and candidates must comply, as well as guidelines for responsible conduct for behavior analysts. So the website www.bacb.com is a good resource. Now, behavior analysts do many different things that are not limited to what is shown on this slide. But some of the things that they do is they conduct and analyze assessments of behavior, and that includes functional behavior assessment, and that consists of interviews and direct observation. They also may do a skills assessment, such as the ABLES or the VB-MAP, and VB-MAP stands for Verbal Behaviors Milestone Assessment and Placement Program, and that's a very common tool. From the analysis of the assessments, the behavior analyst then designs behavior analytic interventions to target the increase of prosocial and the decrease of maladaptive behaviors. The behavior analyst may implement interventions, but most often she will train others or supervise a behavioral technician, paraprofessional, tutor, or aide to deliver the interventions. All throughout the treatment, implementers take data. These data are analyzed by the behavior analyst, who will make changes in the treatment plan based on those data. The behavior analyst keeps abreast of research and behavior analysis through journals, conferences, research papers, and continuing education. He or she will seek consultation from others if there arises a situation where more experience is warranted. This is a map. It may be difficult to see, but it's a map of licensed behavior analysts in Virginia as of April of this year. So you can see that there are large concentrations in the North and in Richmond and Hampton Roads areas, but there are quite a few behavior analysts out west as well. This map actually includes both behavior analysts and assistant behavior analysts. So note that of April 26th, there are actually 591 licensed behavior analysts and 106 licensed assistant behavior analysts. Now those are behavior analysts with license, and they include providers who live outside Virginia but practice here, and thus they need a license to practice here. According to the BACB, there are actually 508 BCBAs, including masterals and doctorals, and 87 BCABAs in the Commonwealth. This next slide is taken from the CDC, and it shows the growth in cases of autism spectrum disorder in the U.S. over a 10-year period from 2000 to 2010. And I want you to take a look at that curve, because you'll note that curve is actually similar to this curve. And this slide shows the number of behavior analysts in Virginia. And it should become no surprise to anybody that there is growth in the number. In 2014 alone, that profession grew from 400 to 600 behavior analysts. And there's nothing that indicates that this trend is slowing at all. So that was a brief discussion on the relation between autism and ABA. Next, I just want to talk about the history of ABA in the legislature. So there are 4 main laws that I'm going to be discussing that pertain to behavior analysts, and they include the 2011 Autism Insurance Law, the 2012 Licensure Law, the 2014 Advisory Board and Exemption Law, and the 2015 update to the Autism Insurance Law. For the most part, these laws were all sponsored by Delegate Tag Greason, who deserves our gratitude for being a champion for children with autism and for behavior analysts. Let's begin with the Autism Insurance Law. This law was tirelessly lobbied by the Virginia Autism Project and Autism Speaks for many years before it finally passed in 2011. According to Autism Speaks, 40 states have some version of an autism insurance law as of April 2015. 5 other states are actively pursuing legislation, and only 5 states are not currently pursuing such a law. In Virginia, it took us about 10 years to get a law that would pass. Virginia Autism Project and Autism Speaks tirelessly advocated year after year, and they were finally rewarded in 2011. At that point in time, only 25 other states had such laws. So to be clear, the Virginia Autism Law requires insurance companies to pay for care for kids with autism when it is deemed medically necessary. Prior to this law, insurance companies could state that they did not cover autism, and if a parent submitted the diagnosis to insurance companies, there was a large chance that the company would not pay for any services of any type, not just ABA. Services now covered for children with autism include behavioral health treatment, pharmacy care, psychological care, therapeutic care such as speech and OT and PT, and ABA when provided by a licensed person. So now in Virginia, kids can't be denied insurance coverage solely because they are diagnosed with or receive treatment for autism. There were some caveats to this law. There was an annual dollar cap of $35,000, an age cap of 2 to 6 years, and in practice, this does not translate to every company in Virginia providing insurance for kids with autism. You may find that companies are exempt because they don't have enough employees to warrant the mandate, or you might come across a self-funded plan that doesn't include the services, although many have elected to despite the mandate exception. You might also find someone who works for a company that is headquartered in a state without an autism insurance law. And those with plans under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare will also not be covered, most likely. For more information on what to do if your company does not cover ABA, see Autism Speaks website and click on Advocacy. I do want to quickly say that an exemption for self-funded plans was not really a negotiation, but under ERISA, no state can actually place a mandate on those types of plans. Many of you may know that in 2015, Virginia Autism Project and Autism Speaks went back to the legislature with Delegate Greason as our patron to remove the age cap from the 2011 law. Now, unfortunately, in order to get it passed, we had to settle for increasing the age cap to age 10, which is still a significant win. This change will go into effect in January of 2016. Another change that was made to the law that year has to do with a federal law that is expected to change soon, and that law will raise the number of employees needed to still be considered a small company from 50 to 100. Therefore, in 2016, companies with 100 or fewer employees will be exempt from the mandate. Another change to the 2011 law that was not a result of the passage of the 2015 bill is the $35,000 cap, that it will most likely not be applied because there's a 2008 law or an act called the Wellstone-Dominici Act that prohibits placing a cap on mental health benefits, including the treatment of autism in Virginia, if there's not a similar cap on physical health benefits. So if your insurance company is still adhering to the cap, you may want to contact Autism Speaks for help and education. Note that Virginia, unfortunately, does not specifically include ABA as a treatment in the Affordable Care Act guidelines, which is why it's not covered in this state, and nor does it include autism within the state definition of mental illness. And again, that is done on a state-by-state basis. So it always seems that laws beget other laws, and this was certainly the case for behavior analysts. When the 2011 autism insurance law passed, one of the amendments that Governor McDonnell added after the fact was one that stated that ABA must be provided or supervised by a licensed behavior analyst or licensed assistant behavior analyst. Now, there was no such license. Therefore, it was necessary for us to go back in 2012 and pass legislation that provided for a license under the Board of Medicine. This was relatively easy bill to pass, and final regulations are in effect. As we saw with the map earlier, there are almost 700 or over 700 licensed behavior analysts and licensed assistants behavior analysts in Virginia. Now, one of the things that was missing when we created the license was an advisory board. This is a standard practice in the Board of Medicine, and the Board of Medicine, or BOM, asked that we go back again in 2014 to add both an advisory board to help them regulate behavior analysts, as well as a student exemption for those that are seeking certification as BCBA or BCABA. And while that was going on, it was becoming apparent that the schools were in violation of license regulations, as teachers and administrators often do functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. It was not feasible to effectively squash interventions based on the science of ABA out of the schools, so instead we created an exemption. This exemption is in no way intended to discourage those who are board certified and working in public or private schools from getting their license. It is only intended to cover those who are not board certified but may be using good reinforcement techniques or looking at functions of behaviors. School employees are not able to practice behavior analysis outside of the schools unless they are licensed. Now, the first advisory board was in 2014, and meetings are held quarterly and they're open to the public. The board regulates that one member is a consumer who is currently receiving ABA services. This is not the end. For instance, Virginia Autism Project and Autism Speaks will most likely go back to the legislature in the future to attempt to remove the age cap completely, as other states have done. You too can get involved by signing up with either or both Virginia Autism Project or Autism Speaks to receive information on advocacy in Virginia as it happens, and those websites are listed here. I strongly urge you to do this. Laws do not change themselves, and while delegates like Tad Greason and senators represent us, they need our help to let them know that what we need for our families. Sometimes changing the law takes time. Many, many, many conversations are held with legislators in order to convince some of the necessity of the law. You can participate by meeting with legislators or writing letters to them, and they do listen to us. Thank you for your patience in listening to this lengthy presentation about laws that pertain to autism and behavior analysis in Virginia, and I wanted to leave you with a list of resources that I'm going to present now. The first slide is about general resources. As I said before, the BACB.com is the website for the body that credentials behavior analysts, board certified behavior analysts. And on this website, they have documents or guidelines for health plan coverage of applied behavior analysis treatment for autism spectrum disorder. You can search for that just by putting autism in the search box. Another important website is virginiaaba.org, and that's the Virginia Association for Behavior Analysts. And there are lots of resources on that website as well. And of course, VCU-autismcenter.org, the VCU Autism Center for Excellence. They have technical assistance, professional development, educational resources, and it's the Educational Research Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders. Some legislative resources include the Virginia General Assembly Legislative Information System. It's really easy to use. On this site, you can look up laws that have been passed and the Code of Virginia. If you just put in the word autism, it's going to come up with a bunch of laws and you can read about them. Also, dhp.virginia.gov/medicine is the website for the Virginia Board of Medicine. And on this site, you can see behavior analysis regulations, and you can also look up licensed personnel. Now, I talked about some advocacy resources. Virginia Autism Project and Autism Speaks are really the main ones involved in this. Virginia Autism Project is a grassroots statewide coalition of families with children affected by autism spectrum disorder, and they're working to create positive change through autism insurance reform. Autism Speaks has a lot of really great things, including the self-funded employer toolkit, which can help you approach your self-funded or RICER employees about adding autism benefits to the company health plan. And it's the place to go if you're having trouble with your insurance company covering services. Some insurance resources include the United Healthcare Children's Foundation, and that provides a grant that can cover insurance copays for children up to 16. Also, the Virginia's Bureau of Insurance. If your provider is not providing the law or following the law, there is a link for that, and you can fill out a complaint form. But there's also some resources there that can help you understand more about insurance. Now, some funding resources include beacontree.org, and they provide funding for family as their funding allows. The ARC of Virginia doesn't provide funding, but they're a super resource for telling you about what funding sources are available. So I strongly advise you contact them if you're looking for funding. Also, the autismsociety.org, there are also different chapters in each locality for the Autism Society, and they are a great resource for information on funding. And finally, the National Alliance on Mental Illness can provide some information as well. So if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me. This is my email address and my phone number. But I want to thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you found this webinar to be informative and helpful, and I wish the best for you and your children.